I wanted to do a talk about careers in offensive security. So you could say I started as a Linux administrator. I would say I started as a customer support, technical support person. Um, and that was kind of the beginning of my career, which we'll actually cover in a minute. But um, I just to kind of introduce the talk a little bit, I wanted to cover what well, first off, what offensive security is, right? It's kind of a big field, and there's a lot of different elements to it. And then who might be kind of a good candidate for it, in my opinion, and hopefully get some people interested because it's a field that I think it needs more folks, and we need more talent. And I just I really want to kind of just share like my passion for all of it. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to do that today. So we're going to jump in. So like I said, an introduction. So I do have to preface just a little bit on the legal side. Of course, we're gonna actually have a little bit of a demo where we're going to show some things that are legal only if you're doing it on your systems and or systems that you have authorization for. So just to kind of keep that in mind, right? This is educational purposes only. You can hack anything that you own, right? That you have kind of that legal permission for, or if you have kind of that written, legal permission obtained. And if you don't know if it's legal or okay to do, then just don't do it. Do some research, figure it out, and of course, understand what the laws say about these things. Um, there's numerous kind of laws that cover this kind of stuff. But in any case, lastly, on this, be ethical. One of the important things for people in this field is companies have to put a high level of trust in an organization and an individual to do it. The amount of times, even in just the last few years that I've had the ability to like completely cripple a hospital is really uncomfortable for me. And I'm not bragging. I'm just saying, it's kind of a lot, right? And so for people that want to be in this position, I can't stress enough how important it is to be a person of high kind of moral fiber, if that makes sense. Obviously, if you want to kind of hack around at home and have fun with kind of your own lab and stuff, that's a different question. But which is, of course, kind of that last bullet there. Definitely do, if you're at all interested, do spend the time, set up your own lab. We're going to have a tool here today that it's really easy, and you actually don't even have to set up your own lab. There's web interface and all that stuff, so it'll make it easy for you. So me, right? I have a certified ethical hacker (CEH) certification. That's it's kind of a base level, really. Honestly, it's in terms of penetration testing and the offensive security stuff. It's kind of that fundamental piece. I think it's raising up a little bit with some of the work they're doing, but and that's one thing that you could look at. But I've been in information security for a little over 3 years, and I've been doing pen testing for 2 to 3 years. So pen testing is, kind of the core of what I do here. Also have done a lot of, kind of security risk assessments, and we work a lot. You can see with the compliance in the name, we work a lot with HIPAA and medical organizations. So I did spend 2 years as there's actually a full review of this, but I spent 2 years as a Linux engineer for Teleperformance USA, where that was a whole process, managing a website that was getting, if I remember correctly, something like 40 million hits a day, with just me and one other guy and a couple data centers across the world. And that was a serious process where I learned a lot. That was my first job just doing Linux. Or my only job just doing Linux, I guess. I spent a few years kind of in the general IT administration, and I've been in IT, like I said, starting back early on in the late 2000s. I say early on, early 2000s in kind of that customer support. I used to work for Microelectronics, which is a parent company for Micro Center, which a lot of you guys are probably familiar with. So if you called tech support in 2008 to 2012, could have been me. You never know. So my first experience with Linux, just really quick, in kind of that early 2000s time, I convinced my parents to buy a second hard drive, and I decided it would be a great idea to try to put Fedora on there. And Grub, I'm saying this purely for the perspective of humanizing, everything. So I had some issues with Grub where I think I changed the boot order when I was installing the disk, and so then SDA 0 became SDA 1, and basically the family computer got it was borked for a little bit. That was the first thing that I did. Right, everybody's got to start somewhere. That was pretty early on in that space, and but eventually, I got everything working, and it was a lot of fun to be there. And I knew at that point that that's kind of where one of the key places that I wanted to spend most of my career, and learning a lot about the ethos of open source and Linux. Yeah, I mean, it made a huge impact on who I am as a person. So there's a lot of me that goes in there. And just purely to kind of enrage, a third to half of the environment. I'm a Vim user. I was in the Slack channel talking about that a few minutes ago, or an hour or two ago. Emacs and Vim, and how Spacemacs, I think is what it was called. That's kind of bridging that gap, and that's a very, I just say that kind of for fun. But I definitely have opened Emacs and gone, oh no, just like I did the first time I opened Vim. How do I get out of this? So we'll take a look. So why are we talking about this stuff today? So first of all, offensive security is growing, right? There's actually more kind of legal things that are happening, right? There are new laws that are encouraging, or even in some cases requiring penetration tests. So that's penetration tests being part of offensive security. It's cool. It's cool for me, right? And it's good for the companies, because having a penetration test is a really good thing to do. You can spend all your time setting up security, but until you've had somebody come and try to actually kick the door down, you can't really be 100% sure how well that security is working. Obviously more breaches are happening. Just last week, the week before last, there was a big release from CISA and NIST, two of the government organizations that cover information security for the organization for the U.S. Where they talked about this increased ransomware risk and all this stuff, and it's just it's a big deal, and which is kind of part of why C-levels are paying more attention now. Hopefully the organization where you work is forward thinking enough to realize, hey, security is a big deal. If we just kind of brush that under the rug, our entire company could get locked up behind some, hopefully when we pay the $10 million in Bitcoin, a la Garmin, we don't know if they paid that or not, earlier this year, then hopefully we'll get our company back. What are you going to do? That's a huge risk. So, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm just incredibly passionate about this stuff. This is something that I do, a lot of, even kind of in my free time. And I want to kind of grow that community of people who are in the offensive security field. And then I think there are already existing connections between kind of Linux open source and the ethical hacking communities. But those are communities that have so much in common that I think it's important to have a dialogue between them, and kind of hopefully build even more bridges, if that makes sense. So really briefly, right, offensive security, I mentioned kind of pen testing is part of offensive security. So I want to talk about what offensive security is. I'm going to talk about who I think is going to be a good candidate for this, and then why I think that a lot of people from the open source community are going to be good candidates too, if it's something that they're interested in. So offensive security, this is kind of a list of some of the things that are in there, and it's not necessarily an exhaustive list, but offensive security is, hacking for good, right? It's kind of taking that stance of putting on your, I guess not really putting on the superhero costume. I guess you're putting on a supervillain costume for a couple minutes and just trying to see what you can do. So penetration testing, right? That's where there's a few different kind of examples. One might be, a lot of times we call it an external penetration test, where we'd be trying to hack into their organization from the outside, doing things like phishing, sending, trying to get people to give credentials, seeing if we can bypass multi-factor, exploits over the internet. And then kind of an internal piece, which is where we would ship a computer, and then we'd have that kind of remote access, or go on site, of course, and have that remote access to say, do a lot of that, to see what we could do if we have that physical access to the network. So a red team is sort of somebody will probably get really mad at me for saying this, but it's sort of similar to a pen test. But I've heard it described as pirates versus ninjas, which is a penetration test is more like a pirate, because it's over the course of a few days or a week, or maybe 2 weeks, generally speaking. And it's more like a pirate because I don't really have the time to be as stealthy as I could be. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to, shoot my cannons, I'm going to board your boat, I'm going to take your stuff. And I really don't care if you know whether I was there or not. It's loud, and, and there's some, you may do things a little bit more stealthily sometimes, but then a red team might be over the course of a month or more, or it may be an existing, engagement where it could be over the course of a year or something. Or you could even work on a red team within an organization where that's your job all the time. And so that's more like a ninja, right? So I'm going to try to steal, I'm going to, sneak past the guards, I'm going to hide in the shadows, I'm going to break into the vault, I'm going to take your gold, and I'm going to leave. And you're not going to know till 3 weeks later when you go to, try to pay your debts, and you find out that there's no more gold in your vault. And in theory, right, if everything's done right, they will have very little, if any, evidence that I was there. Bounty hunting is another one. It's obviously pretty cool. There's a few places, HackerOne, BugCrowd are two of the bigger ones. Companies, internet companies, a lot of kind of startups and big internet companies, even, they will put bounties on things. You can go register, you kind of pass a check and verify your ID, and then you'll be able to obtain authorization to go and test somebody's website. And then when you find a vulnerability, if you find a vulnerability, you write a report for them, you deliver it to them, and they give you money instead of sending you to jail. So that's kind of a middle ground, and I think it's a pretty cool place to be. Social engineering is included in there. Of course, that's things like phishing, even kind of lying to people's faces in creative ways to get them to do things, phone calls, SMS, or smishing, however you want to say that. Physical penetration testing is one where you might go and break into a building. That's a whole different kind of kettle of fish than what I do normally, but it's a thing. Reverse engineering, again, which is kind of part of that hacking. If you're going to try to figure out the vulnerability of an application or something, or a piece of software, what have you, then you might try to reverse engineer. You might have a binary that you're reverse engineering or something like that to try to figure out how you could find vulnerabilities in it. And again, generally, kind of hacking to enhance security. So that's kind of the key. So hacking to enhance security. So the first thing, right, somebody's going to pay you to test their security. That's the first thing, right? You're going to get kind of that legal authorization. You're going to have probably a time window, and you're going to try to find the vulnerabilities that you can. And then you're going to write them a report. And that report is going to be something that, generally speaking, you're going to want to be understandable at a high level by a board, by C-level, executive types, right? I would say normally the example that I want to give in this is something that like your mom would understand, but my mom is also a Linux user, so she's a little higher up on that totem pole than a lot of people's moms. But you know what I'm saying, right? Somebody who's generally a non-tech person could get. And then of course you want to have the another section where it's sort of the nitty gritty, where it's here's the config file that does this, and you need to go change, this. Here's your X equals Y. You need to change it to X equals Z, right? Whereas of course your executives don't care about that stuff. They just kind of want it to work. And then so the end goal is that they're going to be happy because these security holes existed whether you were there or not, right? All I'm doing is looking for security holes. I'm not creating them. These are things that they were there before, and I found them, rather than I created something that's insecure for you. And then now they know what to do about it. So that's obviously pretty exciting for people. Happiness, of course, they're happy. Some people, uh, the way I explain it a lot of times is, um, when you hire me to do a pen test, it's sort of like hiring me to like tell me if you're like, it's hiring me to rate your baby. So like, you have a baby, you say, is this an attractive baby or not? And I say, no, that's a really ugly baby, sorry. And that's, you know, it's a hard thing to process sometimes. So not everybody gets joy out of it. But you know, it's something. So we'll kind of take a look at who might be a good candidate for this. So sorry, I just get really dry when I keep talking. So right, IT people. So generally speaking, right, somebody who's going to be a good pen tester, they're probably not going to go straight into offensive security. You're probably going to have at least some kind of a background. Myself, one of the best things that I have in my career past is a sort of jack of all trades kind of thing, especially when I worked for Micro Center, right? There was no specialization. So it was networking, it was Linux, it was HPUX, it was Windows. Didn't have to deal with Macs at that time, but you know, very broad. So I got to kind of get my feet wet in a lot of areas and learn a lot of different things, which has been helpful to kind of put pieces together. But I could definitely understand if you're a specialist, you're a web developer, right? Let's say you're a web developer. There's things that you would be able to tell me about a website and how it's made that I just don't know yet. So specialists are also really helpful. I'm a puzzle solver. Like if you put a puzzle in front of me, like I really can't help it. Once I know that it's a puzzle and it's something that I can solve, I'm like, oh no. And that's my thing, right? I have ADHD, so just a confession time, I guess. So when normal day-to-day stuff, sometimes it's hard for me to kind of focus on things, and that's part of the thing there. But generally speaking, with puzzles, if it's a puzzle that I'm remotely interested in, I'm just like, ooh, like that's I get locked in, right? When I do a penetration test and I'm solving puzzles all day, I'll forget to like eat or go to the bathroom, and it's sort of, you know, I mean, you know, it's pretty amazing. So something else is important is people who love to learn. So obviously, learning is a huge part of this. You have to be able to learn things, and you have to want to learn things. I'm a perpetual learner. Like if I'm not learning and or solving things, I'm bored. So there you go. So loving to learn is important. So at least a fair level of attention to detail, because because there's a lot of things that you can miss. You know, one of the things that I learned early on was the time when I was on a penetration test. And for anybody who has experience in Active Directory, there's, you know, looking through the users list in Active Directory, and then we see an account that has like a random string of 10 characters in the description field. And I just sort of went like, oh, that's weird. And then my boss and mentor at the time, he's like, hey, what's that? And I'm like, I don't know. Is it a password? And so that's one of the first times that we got a domain admin password in the administrative or in the description field in Active Directory, which just pro tip is available to anybody on the domain. So don't do that. But this is not a Windows talk. This is a Linux, Linux and open source talk. But I mean, a little bit of bad mouthing on Windows, you know. And then being willing to fail. So this is something this is probably my biggest struggle. Because another thing that I have going on is something called imposter syndrome, which is a very interesting thing that basically makes you think that everybody's gonna, you're secretly, you don't deserve to be here, and everybody's gonna find out that you've been like conning them this whole time. And so being willing to fail while you're in that state is very difficult. So, but you know, it's something that I've been dealing with and getting better at. But for the ideal candidate, having some level of willingness to fail, because 98% of the things that you try are not going to work. And it's only that 2% or 1% or you know, 2% in that example, that are actually going to get you anywhere. And so if you don't try the first 98, then 99 and 100 out of 100 are never going to happen. So um, I guess you could do the whole like you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott thing. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of the gist of that. And then, of course, I mentioned before, being ethical is a really important part. So why the open source community? And I'm realizing that I'm talking a lot and I'm a little behind on time, but we're going to get there. So many projects, of course, are open source, right? A lot of people in the community, when they make a tool, they open source it. It goes on GitHub. It's GPL, MIT, however you want to, one of those licenses that will kind of allow other people to use it and modify it and all that stuff. Of course, that's an important thing, and that is part of the open source community, right? A little different than the people who are going to maintain some of the big projects that enterprises are running on, but it's all open source software. It's all part of the same community. I think there's a lot of overlap in skill sets and interests between the two, right? I mean, open source. Oh, good. Sorry, there we go. What? Okay, sorry. So I think there's an overlap in skill sets and interests. I think that there's a lot, of capabilities that are going to match up. People who kind of develop software, who work on open source projects and who have that kind of tinkering mindset, right, and that builder's mindset. And that also applies in capabilities. And then I think that there's a lot of overlap in the ethical standards. I think that purely by way of contributing to an open source project in a significant way, you're not necessarily expecting anything in return, unless you're doing it as part of your job. It's kind of in a lot of cases, it can be a purely good natured thing. I think that is a good indicator for ethical standards, right? So I wanted to take a look at starting, right? So obviously this is about careers, and I've kind of wound around that a lot to give some context. But I want to take a look at where you might start. So for me, what I would do is to kind of take a look and start with 3 questions to ask yourself, right? What do you know? What do you enjoy, and how would hacking fit into that? So again, one of the best examples I think is kind of the web developer thing, and I'm a web developer, or let's pretend I'm a web developer. I'm not. And okay, so that's my skill set, right? I know maybe I'm a back-end developer, or maybe I'm a front-end developer. It doesn't really matter. So I probably already know some ways to break things in ways that they shouldn't, make things work in ways that they shouldn't, or to make things that shouldn't happen. So you're already kind of partway there. Is that something that you think is super fun? Is that something that you really enjoy, kind of making things work in ways other than how they were intended? Well, then maybe that's a good way to kind of mesh these two things. Maybe a web application pen testing career would be great for you. Obviously, a web developer career could be great for you too, but just kind of something to think about. And so, for example, right, let's say tying in this puzzle solving thing. So let's say we're not web developers. Maybe we're kind of end users. But we use a lot of websites because, well, let's be real, everybody does. So maybe you know a little bit, you kind of toyed around, you're like, all right, HTML, maybe a little bit of JavaScript. Okay, I can like set a variable, or I can do like, a little bit of kind of building something in JavaScript. But I really enjoy like kind of puzzle solving. And so I guess then the question might be, to kind of put these 3 together into one, might be, how do I get access to something that I shouldn't be able to get to? And then, of course, the context of in a safe and legal environment. Well, we'll take a look. So a safe and legal environment for this kind of thing. And I do have to give a big shout out. Last year, I actually attended a training on this. Bill Semp and Brian King. So Bill Semp, who I forget who he works for, but he does the OWASP chapter here in Columbus. He's big in that. Brian King is a pen tester who he works for Black Hills Information Security, which I have a lot of, and the acknowledgements here at the end, a lot of this is owed to them. So you could set up an instance of JuiceShop. It's really easy. You basically just set up Node, and then you do you download JuiceShop, the tar.gz file, and then you expand it, and then you just npm start, and there you go, like port 3000 on whatever that system is. You're running JuiceShop now. So it's pretty simple. There's also Docker and stuff like that. So, whatever kind of floats your boat in that space. So start up Firefox, and then there's a tutorial, and it's great. And you can kind of start going through things. A lot of the things in there have some really cool things, where I'm going to try to go into that a little bit here today. But the next thing that's important is kind of sharing that experience with people. Like, I had so much fun doing this, thanks to the folks that worked on this, and there's acknowledgements on that as well. So really quick, I do want to kind of touch on, I want to do a little demo. For anybody who ever watches information security things, there's something of a curse in live demos, but I'm not superstitious. So famous last words. So kind of what I mentioned before, right? So we have, hopefully everybody can see this okay. So I'm in a directory here. This is just a Debian box I set up for this purpose. So I'm gonna just do, I'm gonna just extract it. Just take a second. And I've already set up Node because that's kind of not too challenging. And I gotta give you something to aim for, right? So I'm in the JuiceShop folder now, and I'm just do npm start, and we'll just give that a moment. So there we go. So now port 3000 is available, server listening on port 3000. So now it's running, and other than downloading it with wget, that's about the most challenging thing. So this guy's running now. So then I'm going to jump over, and I want to talk. I probably should have done this first, but I wanted to talk about the OWASP, right? OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. They're pretty incredible. They do a lot of amazing things. I've so many resources, so many hours spent going through some of their stuff, including this. And if you just go to owasp.org and projects and then JuiceShop, that's where it is currently. And this is going to take you to their page on this topic. Really pretty straightforward, right? There's installation over here. You can do it from source. You can get the packages from GitHub. You can do a Docker image. It's pretty straightforward. But you come here, right? And then we're going to look at the tutorial section. And this is going to kind of get you started. So if I want to get to this site, so this, oops, sorry, 3000. So this is the JuiceShop site. So this is running, this is my local, the VM that I set up. And this is kind of, it's emulating kind of a, JavaScript based web store. So it's pretty straightforward. It's really cool. And when you set it up, and actually worth noting too, there's also a demo instance. I should have probably mentioned this before too. This is a place where, you can go, it's specifically challenge, that's their public instance. So you can go to this website right now. You don't have to set anything up yourself. You can go to demo.owasp-juice.shop, and then you can kind of get running and test things out in that environment, which I think is just the coolest thing, that they just have it in a place where it's like, yeah, go try this out, see what happens. All right, so if we look at the JuiceShop, there's a number of different things, and I'm not going to go into detail about how everything works. I'm going to do just a couple of quick demos, and then I'm going to move on because I need to talk about other things. So the first thing, right, is our scoreboard. And the cool thing about this, if you click on it, it'll take you to a tutorial, and you'll have this little blue guy up here that'll take you through the whole process. I'm going to just kind of do a little bit differently. Finding the scoreboard is a matter of looking at our code. So if we do F12, probably people know this, right? F12 is our developer mode. I'm not sure if that key binding is the same across all platforms, but that'll get you there. And then down here, there's a button to kind of print your pretty source file. So this is like all the source. It's minified. For people who don't know what that is, it's basically compressed. So they remove any unnecessary spaces or new lines. And then you can click this little button down here that will change it to print it in kind of a pretty format. So that way you can kind of see what's going on. And the easiest thing is just start looking for what we're looking for. So scoreboard, okay, so this dot challenges, okay, so that's probably in relation to their stuff. I know it's not going to really necessarily all come through on Zoom, so I'm going to kind of just jump forward. If you search a few times, I think maybe I go down to score, and then well, that's interesting. So here's just like slash score dash board. So I don't know, maybe that'll be it. And if we just push that in, then I'm sorry, I did this backwards. We need that. There we go. Okay, so this is the curse where my fingers give out on me. That's how I'm going to be cursed today, and I can't type anything. So this will get you to the scoreboard, right? And I know I'm giving away a little bit, right? It's a little tiny bit on this one, but this is a really cool place that they've kind of gamified all of this in such an incredibly cool way. Because now they're saying, okay, here's our difficulty levels. So these are kind of the 1 star. So if you've never done anything like this, you can just start with these 1 star and just kind of go through and figure out how to do stuff. One of the easiest ones that I think is pretty fun. So a DOM XSS or cross-site scripting attack. So this one's pretty cool. The gist of it is to kind of get the page to load with this information in it. So the easiest way for this one, what you're looking for is like a text box to kind of put something into. So easiest one where you go up to search, there's a search box right there. If we just take that and don't copy paste code, but also we can read it and see what it says. And my fingers will definitely not type that correctly right now. So there we go. So we got the XSS pop up, and then we get these messages saying you did it, great job. Now if we go back to the scoreboard, we'll see that this has been solved. So this is green. So that's pretty cool. Really quick, last thing that I think I'm going to go through today is SQL injection. And I'm doing this because hopefully David Stokes is still watching, because I'm sure that he probably loves this one. This isn't a SQL issue, it's an input validation issue. But this is actually a 2-star one, so it is a little bit more challenging. But we'll do this, and then we'll hide all of them and then do injection, right? So now we're only showing 2 stars that relate to injection. So log in with the administrator's account. So really cool stuff, right? If you click on this little kind of graduate hat here, then it'll take you to an interactive tutorial like the one that showed up before, where it has a little pop-up that says, this is what we're doing, go click this button. Or this guy right here will take you to their page, which you can see poning.owasp. This is their website. Here's injection. Log in with the administrator's account. Now, for anybody who knows anything about SQL injection, this is a very old thing. Unfortunately, it still happens. So it's a vulnerability that's been around for a long time, but if people are not careful, it can still happen. So this gives you kind of a little bit more on the hint side on what you want to do. So for this one, the gist of it is, what happens is the website takes a query, it takes information that you type in, and it merges that into a query, and then it sends that to the SQL server, and then whatever comes back. So it will, let's jump forward here. So if we go into the login field, right? So we're going to try to craft something here. And so really quickly, we're going to terminate the SQL query, because a lot of times it'll be a parentheses or a quote or something like that. And we're going to do or 1 = 1, and then we're going to drop it to a comment so that everything comes after it is commented. So if people don't validate input, then basically this is directly modifying the SQL query. And then because we have to have something in the password, we'll just punch a letter in there. It doesn't matter what you put in. So again, we're terminating the SQL query, and then we are dropping the comments.
Evan?
Yeah.
The voice is speaking to you from behind the curtain, saying that you have 5 minutes left and questions for you.
Okay, perfect.
Just letting you know.
So, all right, I just kind of got that notification there. So, all right. So anyway, so we logged in there, here's our account. We're logged in as the admin now, because depending on how things are set up, user 0 is probably the admin. So if, as I remember, if or the first row in the table is the admin, generally speaking. So if no user specified, it just goes with that. So you don't even have to know anything about the admin if the SQL injection is there. So sorry, I'm running out of time. So we're gonna jump forward, right? So some next steps, important things: making an account. You can do it when you practice. You can get a bug crowd hacker one account. Find somebody to kind of mentor and or train you. Portswigger is a company. They make a really cool tool called Burp Suite, and they have some really cool stuff on there. A company called Offensive Security who does Kali Linux. And they're great. They do a bunch of other stuff. They have a certification for this. Practice, maybe get a cert, and then you can start looking at a job, and or pushing in your environment to kind of spend more time into this space so you can get that practical experience. Sorry, I'm really bad at keeping time. So some other stuff on the Windows side, super quick. Build a lab domain, set up a VM with Kali. Black Hills Information Security, I mentioned them before. And they have some amazing videos on YouTube. The amount of information they give away for free on there is incredible. Cyber Mentor is another person who has a lot of good info. Start looking at some certs and then start looking at a job. So if we want to generalize that, decide the thing that you want to learn, create or find a safe space to learn that thing. Find a resource that can teach you the thing. Invest your time and effort in learning the thing, and consider certifications. They're not 100% required, but you want to have some way to demonstrate that you learned it, and then find out how to get paid. So find that job that will teach you. Oh boy, I'm so far behind now. So my path, right? Telephone technical support, I mentioned it. I went from that up to help desk IT operations, worked at a company called Rack Squared here in Columbus for a little bit, back to microelectronics, junior and then regular system administrator there. Microelectronics, again, parent company for Micro Center. Then I went to Teleperformance USA, enterprise Linux engineer, admin engineer. And I came over to Blue Orange Compliance, started on the kind of blue team, the defensive side, doing security analyst, and then moved over to the offensive side. So these resources, pretty cool stuff. Get some screen grabs here because I don't have time to go through each of these individually. But a couple good YouTube channels, some web resources, some active learning resources, some stuff that Black Hills, they have a cyber range. There's a site called Hack the Box, and that's a bunch of cool things, virtual machine setup you can hack into, stuff like that. Juice Shop, obviously. Some other technical resources there. And I don't necessarily, unfortunately, have time to really talk about these. I'm sure that hopefully some of the questions are really interesting, and I'll stick around in Slack to answer as many as I can as well there. I have to say big thank you to Blue Orange Compliance. We should be hiring soon, I hope. And at that point, right, kind of keep your eye out if this is something you're interested in. I think we're going to be hiring for somebody junior, so somebody who doesn't have pen testing experience but wants to get into it. Of course, Black Hills and Brian King, who I don't think he knows is getting name dropped, but hopefully he's here watching.
Your passion is awesome. We have a Zoom
I told
question.
you I love this.
Do we have time? Do we have time for the Zoom question? Man, no, dude, I love this. I worked at Deja Vu Security in Leviathan, and I ran 2600 group, and like everything you're saying speaks to me so much. So yeah, is it cool to run through the Zoom question, or is our next speaker ready to go?
I think we can do the one, but that's all we really.
Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind hanging out in Slack afterwards, I'll post some of the other questions we have. But the Zoom question right now is by Jonathan. I've worked on pen testing in my past jobs. After I do the Juice Bar website test, what should I do next? I'm looking for my next career. Yeah, that was a lot of your slides in the end there.
Yeah, I know. So the big thing is, right, you find the thing, you learn it, and then you figure out kind of how you can start getting paid. For me, I got really lucky because I had, it was something that my company was doing, and we're expanding into that space, and now I'm kind of not fully in charge, but partially in charge of it. And so learn it. The cert would probably be the next thing. So the AWAE, Advanced Web Attacks and Exploits certification would be a really cool way to go with You can learn a lot in that space, and I've gone through the training. I haven't taken the test, but I did a lot of the training, and it's pretty amazing.
I empathize with your reinstallation of Grubman. That was the first thing right out of the jump that you
Mhm.
mentioned. I was like, yep.
Mhm.
I've been there.
Yeah, it's a
Stupid
good time,
bootloaders.
right? I know. It made the family sad because it was broken for a few days before I could figure it out. And eventually I just ended up reinstalling the Windows bootloader. And
Linux
then,
plays nice with Windows. Windows doesn't always play nice with Linux, I found out. And it will eat your bootloader every single time.
oh, yeah, for
Thank
sure.
you so much. I super
Thank
appreciate
you.
you coming on. I'm going to put some of the stuff in Slack there for you so hopefully you can answer them.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. I'll talk to everybody on Slack.